All right, well, our next piece, somewhat related to AI, is the Hollywood writers' strike has kind of ended. The negotiators feel like they came out with a fantastic deal, and they have told their writers that they can go back to work pending it coming out because they're so confident that everyone's going to vote for it. So some things that don't involve actors are going to actually start getting their writers back, like all the late night talk shows.
Well, so before you get into the story, let's just be clear about that. There have been is it 3 different unions on strike?
2.
The writers, the
Just
actors.
the writers and the actors.
But wasn't it there wasn't a third one?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, I think there was some concern that the DGA might, but I don't think it ever did.
Okay, so
at one point I thought that the Producers Guild was, and then I realized, wait, the Producers Guild is literally who's representing the studios. They're the AMPTS.
Yeah.
So both of them have struck for 4 or 5 months now.
Yeah.
I think it started with the writers, and then the actors joined them, and over a whole lot of different issues. A lot of it has to do with just that pay hasn't kind of kept up with things.
It's because the business model of the industry changed, but the contracts for these workers didn't change, right? When we moved from distribution via DVDs
and
CDs, cable to distribution over streaming networks. The streaming networks, back in the day when we were first getting started in the industry, there was actually this carve out where if you were doing something in the new media, you could work with union talent without paying them union wages. Like there was all of this benefit,
emergent. What was it called? New media, or I don't remember. I know what you mean.
Yeah. And so now that's kind of caught up to bite them, where it's like, okay, now they're doing this cost plus model where basically, they're paid one time a flat fee to make the show or whatever it is, and they get paid cost plus a little bit more, and that's the amount that they're getting paid, and that's it. Right. The creator or the whatever it is, and so yeah.
Well, it was a couple of different things. It was one, they wanted better pay that just kind of kept up with things. They certainly wanted more reasonable pay on the new way that people watch stuff,
because they're not getting residuals anymore, and they were used to that.
And streaming, exactly,
right?
Residuals on cable and on broadcast kind of put a lot of people in their mansions in Hollywood. Especially because it incentivizes you to make a good show that isn't just going to run once, but it's going to get rebroadcast for years and years and years and years, because that's proof that it was a good show. And if it was a good show that gets run years and years and years and years, and in this case streamed, there's so much new content you could watch. If you choose to watch something that's years old, then it was particularly good. We've rewatched Friends many a times. It was very well written. That's kind of evidence of that. But the writers and the actors, but that's kind of an aside, the writers were quite upset that they weren't getting residuals from these things in the same way. Their underlying pay itself hadn't really kept up with things. And 2 other issues. One, having transparency on kind of the metadata surrounding the viewership of streaming content itself, because it's not broadcast, it's not cable. There were laws around broadcast and cable that meant that they had to kind of put their kind of data together, and I think honestly in their case make it public. In this case, they were just saying, we want to have it as the writers. We want to know, when people are tuning in, if midway through the season they just kind of drop out, if right after a particular point in an episode, or if at one particular point in an episode viewership is especially high, or if it drops off completely after a certain point. The studios had that because they controlled the streaming services themselves, but it's entirely proprietary technology. It's not open source. It's not certainly being shared.
Right. With broadcast, we have the Nielsen ratings right there. With music, there's the Billboard charts. There's there's always been this sort of public reporting. But when it moved to streaming, all of those numbers have been kept in-house and kept really, really private. And so the best that there is kind of like the rumor speculation, the gossip mills about who's doing what. But it's been a way that streaming services could hide if they were performing poorly.
Well, and it didn't. There was proprietary services that ran on top that weren't contracted by the studios or anything. They were just to kind of give intelligence to the industry itself, and people would just install them on their computer, and it would keep track on what you're watching and stuff like that. And so it gave some insight, but it wasn't with the voluntary. The studios weren't working with it, so they weren't affirming anything else like that. So it was a way that you could kind of keep the studios in check. If they made some claim that just definitely doesn't make sense with what was being collected by this, the Twitterverse would explode and say, yeah, they're lying about that. This says this says this. Anyway, the writers really wanted to know what's actually happening, what's true, because it would inform their own writing. It would also, well, it would do two things. It would tell them how much residuals they should be getting if there are residuals to come from something, but also, are they doing a good job? Was something working especially well? Was something not working really, poorly and stuff like that? And there's definitely been, without that feedback, there's definitely been some misdirection with streaming. There's been going way too far in one direction and not really kind of course correcting, way too far in the other direction and not really course correcting. And I would say that's partially because they didn't have this actual direct feedback. So one of the terms that they got out of this whole thing is that they are going to actually share the audience data with for the original streaming programs. However, it will most likely not be available to the public. I remember this, it made me think of like many, many years ago when we first got into this industry, we came up with an idea called Media Coin or Movie Coin or something like that. And that was one of its most important aspects, was it actually would report, just kind of like we're all used to on YouTube. As a YouTube creator, I know exactly when viewership went up or viewership went down, and it can give me the feedback I need in order to better shape my content so that it's enjoyable by my audience. But another very key focus for the writers throughout the negotiations centered on the potential use of artificial intelligence as a substitute for their work. They don't want to be replaced. And this is what, of course, when Chat GPT first came out, everyone's like, oh my God, all the jobs are going to be lost, da 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 da. And I was one of those people that didn't really we're many years from jobs being actually lost to this. The much better way, and anyone that isn't doing it this way is silly, is that give the writer access to ChatGPT. Let them decide to what degree they want to supplement their work, or if there's just some part that they don't understand they don't understand the legal world well enough, and yet they're writing like there was a show, She-Hulk, that was kind of a legal drama or a legal comedy kind of thing, while also being this kind of superhero thing. But the writers clearly didn't have any experience with legal dramas, so they weren't good at that part at all, really. And because ChatGPT has the access to, Ally McBeal and, every single, courtroom show that's ever been out, you could probably ask it, make this actually accurate or sound like a courtroom kind of a thing. So you give it the beats or the points that you want the particular characters to say, and you ask it to have its expertise fill in the expertise that you don't have. That would be a great way to use this kind of thing. Now they have the ability to. The studios agreed they will not replace any writers with ChatGPT, but the writers can choose to use ChatGPT or any AI if they want to. They cannot be forced to, which is also pretty cool. However, interestingly enough, there is one little point that this article makes. The agreement does not prohibit studios from training AI on writers' works, which means the whole point that I was making at the beginning of, it's years before anyone's going to have their jobs replaced. Well, this is how they're going to actually replace the jobs. They're going to literally just train on the actual writers.
What's so interesting here is that this is one of the main points of contention with the actors, that the actors don't want to allow them to have their bodies scanned, their likeness scanned, and then just be able to be used, which is completely understandable and honestly horrifying if you are an actor.
I don't know that it is. I don't know that it is. Think about the Star Wars dilemma, right? I think there's a whole lot of people that just
think about the deep fake that we made of me to prove this point. No, I get your horrifying. Point. I get not only to be doing something compromised in like a sexual way, but also to participate in telling a story that you are morally, ethically, otherwise opposed to being a part of, even in an artistic way, to just be like, I think it's bad art. I don't want to be associated with it.
How about a middle ground of you have to receive the person's approval for how it's being used, but it can be used. Because where I'm going with this is, in the world of Star Wars, because I'm a nerd, in case you didn't know, we're now retelling stories that are right after Return of the Jedi. And the way the books went is Luke, Han, and Leia were central to all of them. Carrie Fisher died. Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill are both in their 70s or 80s. They can't play their right after Return of the Jedi characters. Disney famously hired a YouTube deepfake guy, Shamook, I think, in order to get their Luke just right for when he was in Book of Boba Fett, I think. And they did a good job. It was good. The very first iteration of that I don't remember what the name of the movie was, where they had Leia. It freaked people out. Good, yeah. It was not that, that didn't work. It didn't look good at all, and it was primarily because they were recreating it after the fact when the actress had already, I don't think she had passed away yet, but it was her 50 years before. So in the scenario where the actor is still around or their estate is able to give the approval for something, and really it's just in order to do something you wouldn't be able to do with the actor now. You know, there's actually plenty of examples of this happening. The latest Indiana Jones movie, like they captured Harrison Ford himself doing things, and then they used footage of him from the past to deepfake his face so that it looked like the young Indiana Jones. So it's tough because, I mean, you're a director, so I'm honestly kind of surprised. And you've talked about that actors are tools. You know, you don't put them down in that way. You actually consider them very important tools.
But I'm the kind of director that likes to work with the actor because they often
there's still an actor giving this performance.
They often like bring ideas and bring like how they want to play it to me in a collaboration. I have worked with directors, worked under directors who see actors as their puppets, and they just want them to do exactly as they're told. And that's not very successful. That would make sense for this kind of would make sense for that kind of director. Sure. I don't think it's that interesting because where the magic happens is in that collaboration. And so
it is. And however, just to be clear, in this scenario I'm talking about, there is still an actor performing. When they did Luke, the young Luke,
but they're not going to. The AI isn't going to be like, here, I want to play it this way. I think you're getting this wrong.
Hold on,
the beat should be like
this.
this.
The AI isn't doing the performance at all, is what I'm trying to say. The AI is just face replacing, face swapping. It's just changing what someone looks like, but the performance is still captured from the person there on stage, on set itself. So when they had young Luke picking up Grogu, Mark Hamill was literally there, doing his performance, so that it's literally the same actor that has played this character, and he's working with directors and everything else like that, and then the point of the AI was to be able to make his face look like it should look as someone else, because in other cases you get a different actor to do it. You know, when Paul Walker died, his brother played him, and then they deepfaked his face on top of it.
Okay,
so you can still get the performance from someone that you work with, and you keep all those subtleties of the performance in a different face. That's the whole premise.
Okay, that is super interesting, but then it still gets into like, okay, who's deciding that it's okay? Like if you're doing it with Mark Hamill and you're just aging him down, he's still agreeing to it. That's one thing. That seems like perfectly on the up and up. Right. But you're doing it with Paul Walker, his brother's doing it. I mean, now his estate is making decisions on his behalf that he might not be comfortable with that being his legacy. What if you're able to do it with just like living actors who have been
so far,
and yet completely use somebody else to make decisions for them.
They own your likeness rights. Once you've kind of signed them, they belong to them. That part I think needs to change because they should not own the rights.
The way in which they were owning likeness couldn't compel a human to participate in things that they didn't want to.
Agreed.
And
it's just a picture that you can use in various different types of billboards and stuff like that.
Right.
However, they're trying to interpret that to say, well, now we have your likeness and we can recreate Leia as many times as we want to. That I agree. It needs to be with permission.
It's a dangerous, slippery slope.
I totally agree. I don't know where I think there's definitely going to be a version of it where it's being used for the sake of de-aging and it's being used for an actor that is no longer able to participate in something. Once they've died, I don't know where, because their estate has the right to decide all kinds of things about them. But is it okay for someone to decide how, a performance that is created after someone's death outside of their, so I agree. That part is definitely sticky. I completely agree that their permission needs to be sought and given in order to do this. I just think it's important to enable the technology to be able to do it when it's useful. There's edges around that are very hard to get right. I completely agree. So
I was just listening to the Mark and Ben show on the A16Z podcast talking about Hollywood, and it's a great listen if you're wanting to think more about these topics. We need to move on because we're already running over. We could probably spend an hour talking about this alone. Easily.